Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for coming today and all of this great learning that we are privileged to have here today. So I'm very excited to talk to you about nutrition. And nutrition is important across the entire lifespan for us. And we know that our nutritional needs are not the same as we go through life. So we know that during pregnancy, protein needs increase almost 40% from before pregnancy. We also know that from the age of 19 to 50 years of age, females require over double the amount of iron that males require. And we also know that once we pass 51 years of age, that our calcium requirements increase to 1,200 milligrams per day. So we know nutritional needs change, and we need to be educated on when these changes occur. Now, one of the things that we know a lot about nutrition in women's health is during pregnancy. So we have national guidelines that give us very good guidance during pregnancy in what constitutes a healthy diet and what will help mother and baby to thrive during that pregnancy. What we have a lot less information about nutritionally is during menopause and the menopausal transition. And we all had excellent learning this morning about menopause. And so the perimenopause, the 4 to 7 years on average in the lead up to menopause, and then all of the years that we spend after menopause in the post-menopause area or period of life, nutrition becomes very important. And so there are a lot of memes or cartoons, we used to call these, but my son tells me, Mom, we call these memes now, short, poking fun at different areas of life. And so this one says, I don't have hot flashes. I have short private vacations in tropical light conditions. So if you've ever experienced a hot flash, I've never seen during these hot flashes palm trees, the smell of the ocean, waves gently lapping up on the beach. So sure, that's a funny meme, but probably doesn't reflect real life. Another one is the check engine light. So you might be driving the car, and one of the things you might really dread is if that check engine light comes on. And it doesn't tell you what's wrong in the engine. It just tells you there's something wrong with the engine and you better check it out. It could be dozens of different things. And so it's here, so do you ever feel like your body's check engine light has been on and you're still driving thinking, it'll be fine, I'm just going to keep going? And so menopause is a little bit like that. You know the engine light is on, but you're not quite sure about all of the different dozens of things that might be going on in your body. And maybe even some of you are just thinking, I know exactly what's wrong, the engine's overheating. And we just need to cool it down. So today what I would like to focus in on is 3 aspects of nutrition and where it can help with women's health, particularly during the menopausal transition period. But these are nutritional principles that are important for all of us. Doesn't matter what age you're at. So I'd like to focus in today on gut health, on our metabolic health, and our muscle health, because all of these different areas are affected as we go through the menopausal transition. So I'm going to start with gut health. And we know that when we go through the menopausal transition, there's many, many symptoms. And this morning we saw a big list of those symptoms. Sometimes those symptoms that are not talked about, maybe as much, are things that we might be feeling in our digestive tract or in our gut. So things like Constipation might become more common. Food intolerances or sensitivities. So I used to be able to eat this particular food, I loved it, and now it just doesn't sit right, or I can't eat it at all anymore. Anxiety. So we today know that there is a two-way communication, a two-way highway between our gut and our brain. So we call this the gut-brain axis. And so if your gut health is not in a good state, it can affect things like your mood and anxiety and depression. And another very common one is bloating. So a lot of women start to feel the effects or feel like they are just more bloated as they go through menopausal transition. So again, a beautiful balloon, hot air balloon rising in the sky, but maybe sometimes that's what you feel like when this bloating occurs in terms of the menopausal transition. So what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is maybe what's at some of the root of that gut health, the gut health issues we might be experiencing. And so you may or may not have heard of this term, the gut microbiome, or the gut bacteria. So these are all of the bacteria and other microorganisms that live in our intestinal tract. And they have a profound effect on many areas of our health. And I'm just going to share two really interesting pieces of research linking the gut microbiome to very concrete areas of our nutritional health. So the first one is a research study where they took participants in the research study and they helped them to lose weight. They went on a diet intervention, and some in the study lost weight. And then they looked at their gut bacteria. So they gave a stool sample. That's how we determine what your gut microbiota looks like. And they profiled those and looked at the composition of their gut bacteria. And what they saw was that depending on what your baseline gut microbiota was, so when you started the study, could actually predict whether or not you were going to lose weight on that diet intervention. And so we know that diets, the one-size diets, don't fit for everybody, because there was definitely people in that study who were dieting, doing everything that was asked of them, but still didn't lose the weight. And so part of that piece of the puzzle might be the bacteria that are living in your gut. Another very interesting research study that's been done is in terms of artificial sweeteners. So artificial sweeteners have replaced sugar in many foods and drinks, and in the most part they were put there to help us cut out sugar, cut out calories. But there's a growing body of research that suggests these artificial or no-calorie sweeteners might actually be causing obesity, causing prediabetes and diabetes, as opposed to actually helping us prevent them. And so again, what's the link here to gut health and this artificial sweetener? What they've seen is that if you give, again, research participants, people who signed up for this study, they fed them the artificial sweeteners over a number of weeks, and some of those people developed a pre-diabetes-like state and other people didn't. And so we call these non-responders or responders. So do you respond to these detrimental effects of artificial sweeteners or not? And they could pinpoint and see that that was directly related to their gut bacteria, the profile of gut bacteria they had. So we know these bacteria, these trillions of bacteria that are living in our gut, are really important in terms of not only just our digestive health and how we feel, but other aspects of our health as well. So let's think about how could we improve our gut health with nutrition during menopause. And so we know from the research that if we consume more live microbes, so if we consume more foods that contain bacteria, it's been shown to help lower osteoporosis prevalence in postmenopausal women. So one of the areas that it gets affected when we go through menopause is our bone health can be compromised, and so you can develop thinning of the bones or osteoporosis. And so the research study in terms of looking at nutrition and how can we maybe protect our bone health was to eat more foods that contain bacteria. So I'm going to just put up a list here. So we call these foods fermented foods. And what is a fermented food? It's a food where they have taken an ingredient and added bacterial cultures into it to either improve the taste or the texture or the nutrition of that product. So you can think of things like yogurt is a fermented food. When you eat yogurt, you get some of these microbes or these bacteria. So other things, sauerkraut, kefir or kefir, a fermented dairy drink, kimchi is a spicy fermented cabbage, and kombucha is a fermented tea. Yogurt, we're very familiar with that, but miso, cheese, sourdough breads, these are all considered foods where bacteria has been used to create the food, and that is good for us, and it's good for our health to have those bacteria being consumed by us. The next thing is probably one of the most important things you can do for your gut health, and that's dietary fiber. And we know that a whole variety of fiber, so yes, from your whole grain, your whole wheat breads, etc., but also vegetables, fruit with the peel on, etc., are very good for feeding the healthy bacteria in our intestine. Now, one of the things that is not so good for our digestive health is the products that are white. And so you can see I'll show you that again. What's disappearing from the slide? There we go. So white bread, white pastas, all of these foods, these starchy foods that are not whole grain, that don't have the fiber component, they are not beneficial for our gut bacteria and our gut health. So I would like to just put up a list of some very good sources of dietary fiber for us. You can think about the grains, so the whole grain breads, whole wheat pasta, and all bran cereal. There's a number of excellent fruits and vegetables that are higher in dietary fiber than some others. And so if we're eating from a variety of these foods every day, then we can be sure that we're feeding those healthy bacteria that live in our intestines. So this eat more fiber, that's a very commonly taught and preached by dietitians. And so what I'd like to do is just give you a visualization of, and hopefully maybe it'll stick a little bit better as to why we want to eat these dietary fibers. What exactly are they doing in our intestine? So I've got a picture here of our intestinal tract. So this is what it looks like. We have this very nice line of intestinal cells. And on top of those intestinal cells, that pink area you see is this thick layer of mucus. And that mucus is actually very beneficial, very protective to our intestine. Oftentimes when we think about mucus, we think, oh, that's something we don't want to have. But in our intestine, on the lining of our intestine cells, we want a nice thick layer of that, because that protects our intestinal cells from bacteria and bacterial products and pieces actually getting too close to our actual intestinal cells, and in some cases actually leaking through. So you may have heard of this term leaky gut. So this is when that whole nice barrier in intestinal health breaks down. So on the opposite side, you can see, so that's when you have a lot of a very fiber-rich diet, that's what your intestine looks like, this really healthy, intact barrier and good gut health. But on the other hand, when we eat a fiber-free diet or a low-fiber diet, what happens is those bacteria, they don't have their preferential food, which is dietary fiber. Bacteria in our intestine love dietary fiber. They thrive on dietary fiber. When you don't have fiber in the diet getting to them, they still have to eat. So what are they going to eat? They're going to eat that mucus layer in our intestine. And that then allows all the bacteria and other food particles that are in our intestine to actually sometimes leak through. And this can cause inflammation in the rest of the body. So we want to, I hope you keep this picture in your mind of why would you want to eat more fiber. It's to protect this barrier in our intestine. Okay, so what are a few other things in terms of our gut health in nutrition? So the other thing we know is that very fatty foods or foods with a lot of sugar in them can also compromise not only the bacteria in our intestines, so the ones that are less beneficial to us, they love the fats and they love the sugars, and so they're going to grow a lot on that. The other thing is these very fatty foods and sugary foods can also break down that really nice barrier that we have in our intestine and cause inflammation that way. Another thing is very processed foods. So we call these ultra-processed foods. So they don't really resemble very much the actual raw ingredients that went into making them. So they've got a lot of additives included in the making of that product. So maybe more sugars, more additives, maybe more artificial sweeteners. All of these additives into here cause this to be called what's an ultra-processed food, and just not, again, known to be healthy for those bacteria in our intestinal overall health. So let's just switch gears here now from gut health to a little bit talk about our metabolic health. So we know that as we move through the menopausal transition, we become at greater risk for many of these chronic diseases like heart disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, etc. And we also know that many diseases, very common diseases, so these include cancer, heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, depression, and even Alzheimer's disease, these have all linked to chronic inflammation in the body. And again, this inflammation in part can be linked to our gut health. So many things always come back to our gut health. And so inflammation is something we'd like to reduce in our body to hopefully prevent or lessen the risk of some of these diseases. So what are some anti-inflammatory foods that we could focus on eating more of? Things like olive oil, fish, nuts and seeds. These are all very common foods that are part of the Mediterranean diet. So you may have heard that Mediterranean diet being promoted as good for reducing inflammation. So yeah, these are often included in that. The green leafy vegetables, bell peppers, all variety of different berries, and then even including spices into the foods that we eat every day is beneficial for helping, again, on a regular basis to reduce this inflammation. We have to always balance what we're doing in terms of our nutrition, our physical activity, our lifestyle, etc., with our genetic risk, because we all come into this world with either being more or less prone to develop certain chronic diseases. So we know that in terms of type 2 diabetes, that 1 in 2 people of us sitting in this room here possesses a high-risk variant or type of a particular gene that increases the risk of developing type 2 diabetes when whole grain consumption is low. So when we don't consume those high fiber grains and the whole wheat, whole grain breads, etc., when we're consuming more of the white bread, that 1 in 2 people in this room will be more likely to develop diabetes from eating those products rather than the whole grains. So we want to consume more whole grains. 7 out of 10 people are at greater risk of experiencing elevated blood pressure when higher amounts of sodium are consumed. So you can see a lot of us carry certain genetic risks, and many of these genetic risks are linked to things that we do in our diet. And so the very common recommendations to reduce sodium are applicable to a wide array of us. And the last one here is that 1 in 2 people are at greater risk of elevated triglyceride levels. This is a blood fat that can be tested when consuming a diet low in omega-3 fats. So omega-3 fats we get from fatty fish, some in egg yolks and things like that. But again, 1 in 2 of us here, when we don't consume enough fish and omega-3s, would be at risk for these higher blood triglycerides. So we have to think about balancing, and some of us will be at greater risk and others of us won't, and why some components of the diet are really important for those of us with more of a genetic predisposition to develop some of these. And how do we know that? Sometimes you just have to look at your family history to see what's common in your family, because we don't all get genetic testing. The last one I want to just touch on here is muscle health. So beginning at about age 30, our body naturally starts to lose 3 to 5% of our muscle mass every decade. So we are losing muscle mass, we're losing the function in that muscle. So the menopausal transition kind of accentuates and accelerates changes we might be having in our body and our composition of our body. So our fat mass to our muscle mass starts to shift. So they've seen that during the menopausal transition, that our lean body mass, like our muscle mass, decreased by 0.5%. So on average, every year there was a loss of about 0.2 kilograms, while fat mass increased by 1.7% per year. So an annual gain of fat mass of just about 0.5 kilogram. So these changes are occurring, and so what can we do in terms of nutrition to maybe protect that muscle? Because muscle is incredibly important, not only for our metabolic rate, to keep us burning calories when we're at rest and whatnot, but also just for our daily function. How well we function in activities of everyday life is really closely tied to our muscle health. So in addition to hormonal changes, low protein intake, low vitamin D intake, and low physical activity are the risks for our muscle health. So we want to make sure we focus in on those. So what are some good proteins that we could consume? And one point I want to make here is that we don't just go out and start eating more protein and expecting to grow these big muscles. You have to do the exercise with that in order to optimally utilize that those good proteins that you're eating. So strength training exercises, resistance type exercises is going to help with this. So fish, lean meats, low-fat dairy, eggs, some plant sources there like beans, tofu, and quinoa would be some good proteins to add in. Okay, the last thing I want to mention here is supplements, and we've had a few comments on supplements today. So I went to Google and I asked Google a question. I don't know if you've ever asked Google a question. Sometimes you kind of hope you wish you hadn't. So I asked which supplements help with menopause symptoms, and to my dismay, really, I got 22 web pages of suggestions of what supplements could help with menopause symptoms. So, and the list is long, and as we've heard already today, there's not a lot of good evidence in terms of most of these supplements being able to help with menopause. One, I will say vitamin D. So especially here in Calgary, we do not make vitamin D in our skin for 6 months of the year. And so particularly over those winter months, we should be relying or taking a vitamin D supplement. And even for a lot of Calgarians throughout the year, a vitamin D supplement is important, not only for our bone health, but for muscle health, etc. So out of that list, vitamin D is just one I wanted to point out. The other thing with supplements is sometimes it can give people a false sense of security. So I'm taking this supplement, it was promising the world, so I think, okay, but maybe we should rather be focused on good nutrition, physical activity, healthy sleep habits, etc., might do more for us than some of these unproven supplements. So I would just like to end off maybe with a practical tip here. So if you're thinking about, okay, what can I do with this in terms of maybe breakfast tomorrow morning? Well, we could take a high fiber cereal. So this is something like a Smart Bran. It's a mixture of a few different types of dietary fiber. We could put that in with a fermented food, so a yogurt. And there are yogurts with high protein content now, so maybe a Greek yogurt that has extra protein with our fiber, and then an anti-inflammatory berry, blueberries. And so we've got this really nice rounded out breakfast meal that has covered off many aspects of our health. So in conclusion, I just want to just emphasize that nutrition really has a major influence on women's health. And it's really everything from our everyday energy levels and our mood to long-term disease prevention. And good nutrition can support our bodies through every stage of life. And when we think about nutrition, we should not beat ourselves up. It's not about perfection, but about creating sustainable habits. So thank you very much.